All Hallows Eve, the evening your nightmares come to life, all the creatures of the night come out to play. It's time to pay tribute to this terrifying month, so join us as we celebrate the sinister season. This is the Venom month of horrors.
Hello and welcome to the Venom month of horror. 31 days of pure terror in video form, and today we're returning to the king of horror himself, Stephen King.
Why don't you start right now and get the fuck out of here?
The Shining, based off of the Stephen King novel of the same name, features Jack Torrance, played by Jack Nicholson, and his family, wife Wendy, played by Shelley Duvall, and Danny, played by Danny Lloyd. Jack is hired as the winter caretaker of the Overlook Hotel, situated in the mountains in the middle of nowhere. They meet the chef, Dick, played by Scatman Crothers, which sounds like a serial killer already.
I knew it.
Who befriends Danny, who also seems to have an imaginary friend called Tony who talks to him through his finger, slowly revealing he has psychic abilities. Yeah, this movie kind of invented the psychic child cliche.
Completely unintentional.
As Jack begins to slowly go insane inexplicably and attack his own family before meeting his own demise. The movie came about when Stanley Kubrick was reeling from the failure of his picture Barry Lyndon, and he wanted to make a film loved by both critics and the box office. Stephen King was informed that Kubrick had his people bring him piles upon piles of horror books for him to go through. Kubrick's secretary heard the sound of each book hitting the wall as the director flung it into a reject pile after reading just the first few pages. Finally, one day, the secretary noticed that it had been a while since she had heard the thud of another writer's work biting the dust. She walked in to check on her boss and found Kubrick deeply engrossed in reading The Shining. There's something inherently wrong with the human personality. There's an evil side to it. One of the things that horror stories can do is to show us the archetypes of the unconscious. We can see the dark side without having to confront it directly.
I am not gonna let you fuck this up.
King learned of this when he received a phone call from Kubrick himself, and due to the time difference, it was the early hours of the morning for Stephen. He assumed one of his kids had had an accident or something until his wife informed him that it was actually Stanley Kubrick on the other end of the line. Immediately, the filmmaker began talking about how optimistic ghost stories are because they suggest that humans survive death. No it doesn't. They die from death. They just live on in energy. And they still die.
Is there something bad here?
But he dismissed the concept of hell entirely. King then replied, "There are people who believe in hell and they fear it more than death itself." This is what made Kubrick truly understand the feel for the entire story. Jack Nicholson was always the first choice for Jack, but Robert De Niro was also considered, as were Robin Williams and Harrison Ford, but King disapproved of all of them. De Niro would later claim that the movie ended up giving him nightmares for a month, and other considerations were Martin Sheen, Leslie Nielsen, and even Chevy Chase. Will people please stop considering Chevy Chase for awesome roles that he doesn't deserve?
I don't think that's true.
Not only did Stephen King hate the casting of Jack Nicholson because he was already prone to playing psychotic characters and therefore the transformation wouldn't be anything special, but he also hated the casting of Shelley Duvall as Wendy. I envisioned Wendy as being a blonde former cheerleader type who never had to deal with any true problems in her life, making her experience in the Overlook all the more terrifying. Duvall was too emotionally vulnerable and appeared to have gone through a lot in her life, basically the exact opposite of how I pictured the character. King actually did submit his own screenplay to Kubrick, but it was rejected. He was a lot more loyal to the source material, but if it was anything like the miniseries he would go on to make, it was probably boring as piss.
No need to rub it in.
Jack Nicholson actually wanted Jessica Lange for the role, but Kubrick insisted on changing the character from the novel into a more emotionally fragile woman, which suited Shelley Duvall perfectly. Nicholson would later call Shelley's performance fantastic and the toughest job of any actor that he has ever seen. Kubrick wanted Slim Pickens, which is an amazing name by the way, to play Dick, but he refused, stating that he wanted nothing to do with the director after working with him on Dr. Strangelove. Ouch.
You son of a bitch!
The child from Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Carrie Guffey, was approached to play Danny, but his parents refused based on the movie's subject matter. The film was shot in sequence and the huge sets were built in Elstree Studios in England, but a fire broke out in February of 1979, causing a delay in filming. The movie took over a year just to shoot due to Kubrick's perfectionism and douchebag-like behaviour. In the behind-the-scenes documentary, you can see him and actress Shelley Duvall constantly at each other's throats as he lambasted her for her acting and missing her cues, even telling crew members to ignore her and give her no sympathy whatsoever, even claiming that she was wasting everybody's time. Due to how traumatized and extreme her performance needed to be, in addition to Kubrick's demand for multiple takes, she literally ran out of tears and became dehydrated for most of it. Kubrick intentionally tormented Shelley to add to her on-screen performance, causing her to fall ill, and her hair even began to fall out due to the stress.
I'm pretty sure this is illegal.
Not for me.
He later claimed he was thoroughly impressed with her performance and thought very highly of her acting talents.
Wasn't really acting though, was it? She actually was miserable and traumatized and depressed, you piece of scum.
Are you out of your fucking mind?
Amazingly, Shelley still held no ill will against the director for this. She claimed he was only trying to get the best out of her and she wouldn't trade the experience for anything, though she would never want to repeat it. But strangely, Kubrick was actually really protective of Danny, only using him for the shots that were vital and using a dummy for others. Danny wasn't even aware that he was in a horror film, he was just told it was a drama and didn't discover the truth until he turned 18 and finally saw the film. The script was changed more times than The Dark Knight stumbles, causing Nicholson to get so frustrated he even threw out copies of it, refusing to memorize the lines, adamant that it would only change again the next day. He very often read the scripts just minutes before shooting. Rehearsals would usually span from 9 AM until 10:30 PM. Just the rehearsals. Nicholson's girlfriend at the time stated he would return home late and literally collapse in bed, falling asleep instantly. He did admit that the hardest scene to shoot was when he's typing and Wendy interrupts him before he yells at her to leave him in peace. Nicholson himself was a writer and has had similar altercations with his girlfriend in real life, so the scene hit a little too close to home. To keep him in character as agitated as possible, Kubrick would only feed him cheese sandwiches, which he absolutely hated.
Who the hell hates cheese sandwiches?
I'm awfully glad you asked me that.
But because of the constant script changes, improvisation was actually allowed. Throwing the ball around the lobby was Jack's idea, as was the little pig's line as he bashes the door down, Danny using his finger to talk as Tony was his own suggestion. Their clothes were taken away to be cleaned constantly as they'd be covered in sweat before too long, and this is one of the first films to use a Steadicam, which was relatively new at the time, but production was a nightmare. In addition to the obscene amount of takes Kubrick demanded, the set also had no air conditioning. Scatman Crothers was 69 years old at the time and found it extremely difficult to sometimes give 100 takes for a scene. In fact, when Jack axes him off, Kubrick originally wanted 70 out of him before Nicholson insisted on the director to go easy on the older man, so he cut it down to just 40.
Just 40. Just 40.
It's not a very demanding job.
Crothers' next film would be Bronco Billy, directed by Clint Eastwood, who famously goes for one-take shots. Crothers actually broke down in tears at the relief after working with Kubrick on this one. The scene with blood coming out of the elevator was one of the hardest shots to pull off, as Kubrick felt it didn't look real enough, and this one small shot that only lasts a few seconds took an entire year to perfect. The iconic sequence where Jack backs Wendy up the stairs as she wields a baseball bat is in the Guinness World Book of Records for the most takes required for one scene. 127.
127. 127. That's just sadistic. You can see it in her eyes as well. She's just thinking, please no more takes, you crazy fat man.
You've got a big surprise coming to you.
Originally, John Williams was going to do the musical score, but Kubrick decided he wanted it to be from several different composers instead, before finally finishing the film after over a year of shooting. After the picture premiered, Kubrick still wasn't happy as he cut out an entire scene at the end in hospital with Wendy as she's informed Jack's body was never found, which just makes even less sense and makes the ending even more confusing, but regardless, The Shining was released on May the 23rd, 1980 and originally did quite poorly. The box office gross did slowly start to improve, but it was generally mixed between critics. Nicholson's performance makes the film, and the Overlook Hotel is an effective setting for horror, but the supernatural story knows frustratingly little rhyme or reason. Even the film's most startling, horrific images seem overbearing and perhaps even irrelevant. With everything to work with, Kubrick has teamed with Jumpy Jack Nicholson to destroy all that was so terrifying about Stephen King's bestseller. Many slammed it for its slow pacing.
You all love The Godfather, right? Just checking.
I don't believe they did.
The main consensus was that it wasn't the norm for horrors back then. Roger Ebert claimed that he just couldn't connect to any of the characters, and it was even nominated for a Razzie for Worst Director.
What? How?
And Worst Actress for Shelley Duvall.
Okay, now that I can understand.
Okay, I understand.
However, over the years, people suddenly backtracked, and Ebert put it on his great movies list, and even said, Stanley Kubrick's cold and frightening The Shining challenges us to decide, who is the reliable observer? Whose idea of events can we trust? It is this elusive open-endedness that makes Kubrick's film so strangely disturbing.
My opinion has drastically changed.
Just as the ghostly apparitions of the film's fictional Overlook Hotel would play tricks on the mind of poor Jack Torrance, so too has the passage of time changed the perception of The Shining itself. Many of the same reviewers who lambasted the film for not being scary enough back in 1980 now rank it among the most effective horror films ever made, while audiences who hated the film back then now vividly recall being terrified by the experience. The Shining has somehow risen from the ashes of its own bad press to redefine itself, not only as a seminal work of the genre, but perhaps the most stately, artful horror ever made.
Thank you for saying so.
Stars Jack Nicholson and Shelley Duvall had great resentment for the film's reception, believing that far too much emphasis was put on Stanley Kubrick's direction and not enough on the actual actors starring in the film, both considering it the hardest of their careers. The AFI selected The Shining as 29th in their 100 Years 100 Thrills, Jack Torrance as the 25th greatest villain, and the famous line,
Here's Johnny!
as the 68th greatest quote, with Premiere putting it as 36th, which is amazing considering Nicholson improvised it and Kubrick didn't understand the reference to the Johnny Carson show and almost didn't even use it. Channel 4 picked it as the scariest movie ever made, with Entertainment Weekly putting it as 9th, Total Film picked it as the 5th best horror, Bravo called this the 6th scariest movie moment ever. Legend Martin Scorsese picked it as one of his top 11 scariest horrors in history, but unfortunately original author Stephen King was not a fan. He admitted that it has memorable imagery, but it's a poor adaptation, and it's the only adaptation of any of his novels that he remembers ever hating. He did confess that Kubrick's version did contribute something of value to the horror genre, and because of that, it's one of his favourites.
One of his favourites, but he hated it. What?
I must be losing my mind.
The author wrote the original novel when he was suffering alcoholism problems, which is evident in the story, so he was disappointed that it wasn't explored in the film, and nor were much of the disintegration of the family. Instead of Nicholson, he wanted John Voight, Christopher Reeve, or Michael Moriarty, someone who looks more like a normal everyday guy. He slated Shelley Duvall's performance, claiming that she's just there to scream and be stupid, which isn't the woman he wrote about, as in the book she was a very independent, strong and intelligent character, and not a dickhead in distress. The movie focused more on the hotel trying to claim Jack instead of Danny like the book. Originally Jack was a likable guy with an alcohol addiction but slowly turned to the dark side, whereas in the film there's no real transition, he's weird from the start. Also, the book had Jack recover his good nature and sanity with some intervention scenes with Danny which never made it to the movie. He even tries to help him and Wendy escape the hotel, and this was completely ignored for the film. The movie also downplayed the supernatural side of things. King wanted Jack to be a victim of the haunting of the hotel, whereas Kubrick portrayed it as if the terror was coming from within Jack himself. Parts of the film are chilling, charged with a relentless claustrophobic terror, but others fall flat. Not that religion has to be involved in horror, but a visceral skeptic such as Kubrick just couldn't grasp the sheer inhuman evil of the Overlook Hotel. So he looked instead for evil in the characters and made the film into a domestic tragedy with only vaguely supernatural overtones. That was the basic flaw, because he couldn't believe. He couldn't make the film believable to others. What's basically wrong with Kubrick's version of The Shining is that it's a film by a man who thinks too much and feels too little, and that's why, for all its virtuoso effects, it never gets you by the throat and hangs on the way real horror should. In the book, the hedge animals come to life, but Kubrick cut that out because of the restrictions and special effects and replaced it with the chasing through the maze. Tony is actually Danny's adult self talking to him from the future, and the film never actually acknowledges this. The movie does vaguely show ghosts in short flashes, but it's always left to the viewer's interpretation. What the hell are they and what do they mean? Are they a paranormal entity, or is the subject witnessing them merely hallucinating?
I don't know.
Kubrick is telling a story with ghosts, but it isn't a ghost story because the ghosts may not be present in any sense at all except as visions experienced by Jack or Danny. The movie is not about ghosts but about madness and the energies. King would have us believe that the hotel is haunted. Kubrick is less definitive in the interpretations he offers. I consider it a failure as a ghost story, but it's brilliant as a study of madness and the unreliable narrator. The question itself was expanded more because in every scene where Jack sees an alleged ghost, he's facing a mirror, leading people to believe it's his own imagination and his own interpretation of himself. But all of these were finally laid to rest when Kubrick himself admitted that the ghosts were real, and it's all down to one scene. It seemed to strike an extraordinary balance between the psychological and the supernatural in such a way as to lead you to think that the supernatural would eventually be explained by the psychological. You think Jack must be imagining these things because he's crazy. This allowed you to suspend your doubt of the supernatural until you were so thoroughly into the story that you could accept it almost without noticing. It's not until Grady, the ghost of the former caretaker who axed to death his family, slides open the bolt of the larder door allowing Jack to escape that you are left with no other explanation but the supernatural.
I'm very confused.
Stephen King was also annoyed that Kubrick didn't film in the Stanley Hotel itself where the story originated, but Kubrick claimed he relocated due to lack of snow and electricity. I think he set out to make a film that hurts people. It's like a great big beautiful Cadillac with no motor inside. You can sit in it and enjoy the smell of the leather upholstery. The only thing you can't do is drive anywhere. So I would do everything differently. The real problem is that Kubrick set out to make a horror picture with no apparent understanding of the genre. Everything about it screams that from beginning to end, from plot decisions to the final scene. King also claimed that he has never understood why anyone finds the movie scary to begin with.
Yet he finds water hoses and mallets scary. Makes sense.
How could you?
The Shining I consider a masterpiece. I can see where Stephen King is coming from. Nicholson doesn't really come across as normal at the beginning. I mean, this is one of his first scenes.
I know all about cannibalism. I saw it on TV.
See? It's okay. You saw it on the television.
Creepy.
Living room, bedroom, bathroom, and a small bedroom for your son.
Perfect for a child.
What was the point of that line? In fact, that is creepier than anything he says or does when he is evil.
In fact, Dick comes across as really creepy too.
Well, anyway, he looks like a doc, doesn't he?
Yeah. What's up, Doc?
Dude.
How'd you like some ice cream, Doc?
Jack's the child killer, right? Yeah.
There's even this scene where Dick starts to have visions of Danny, but it looks more like he's just receiving a blowjob. I also feel the changes from the source material were made to make it more cinematic. Some could have remained in, like the Tony explanation and maybe Wendy's original characteristics and such, but for the most part the other changes tend to work. Kubrick may have been a psychotic madman, but he definitely knew how to tell a compelling story with mesmerizing visuals. These shots are so entrancing and you can tell the amount of effort and rehearsing that went behind them. The long takes, the steadicam movements, they're insane, and the musical score is so unique, which also adds that sense of pure terror. But could they have picked a more boring and bland type of font for their opening titles?
Yeah?
Fellow director Steven Spielberg also praised the directing, especially the scene with 127 takes. Wendy discovers Jack's novel before he shows up and everything goes down. The obvious way of playing the scene would be to have Jack suddenly appear over Wendy's shoulder while she and the audience are preoccupied with the manuscript. Instead, Kubrick abruptly cuts away from Wendy to a shot from behind the pillar that tracks over to a distant view of Wendy from behind, thus preparing the audience of Jack's entrance into the frame and eliminating any shock of his appearance. Kubrick's unusual way of filming and editing the scene has two benefits. One, it allowed the remainder of the sequence to maintain tension without a moment of relief that would follow from a shock, and two, by avoiding a surprise at that moment, Kubrick saved the biggest scare in the film for Dick's murder, in which Jack's sudden appearance does come as a shock.
Yeah, I guess so.
I personally find the film quite scary. The long takes allow the tension to build more along with the music, so you're sat uncomfortably waiting for the car crash of events to take place, and that's exactly what a horror movie should be. This is the best and most famous scene of the entire film, and I think it's pure perfection. The 127 takes is madness, but I'll be damned if anyone says it sucks. Jack's performance, the camera work, the dialogue, the tension is all built magnificently, which is complemented well with the musical score, and Shelley's acting isn't too bad either. Jack Nicholson gives a groundbreaking performance, and although some parts are quite silly, they work for the patronising and heartless character.
You think maybe he should be taken to a doctor? When do you think maybe he should be taken to a doctor?
As soon as possible? as soon as possible.
Everyone else is fantastic, except Shelley Duvall. Seriously, this scene I just mentioned, she's only okay, and that's compared to the rest of the film where she's terrible.
Well, I wouldn't like to say. Most winters, they stay that way until spring. Over?
Boy, this storm is really something, isn't it?
Boy, my acting is really convincing, isn't it?
I'm quite surprised so many people liked her performance, but that's their opinion. I thought she was awful. I understand you'd be in a state of hysteria under these circumstances. In real life and the movie. But it just doesn't come across as realistic and believable. It just looks forced and fake and laughable.
In fact, just like...
I've got an appointment with Mr. Ullman. My name's Jack Torrance.
His office is the first door on the left.
It's right next to my acting class.
When Jack gets hired for the job, he has a meeting with the owner, Mr. Ullman, who feels obligated to inform him that a previous caretaker called Grady went nuts and killed his family with an axe. Now to me, this scene was just the most forced and unnecessary foreshadowing in film history. It was not needed one bit.
I thought that it was what the old-timers used to call cabin fever.
No, don't be silly. That's a film for another time.
Mr. Allen, what is in room 237?
Nothing. There ain't nothing in room 237. But you ain't got no business going in there anyway. So stay out.
Gee, I wonder how long until he goes in there.
You slip me a bottle of bourbon, a little glass, and some ice. You set 'em up and I'll knock 'em back, Lloyd. One by one.
Actually, Jack Daniels isn't a bourbon. It's a Tennessee whiskey. Just saying.
There's someone else in the hotel with us. There's a crazy woman in one of the rooms. She tried to strangle Danny.
If you were apparently alone in a hotel and you were actually convinced that there was a woman in there with you that just strangled your child, why would you then leave him alone? Go get your kid.
I love the little son of a bitch.
There's a part where Jack checks out the hotel room where Danny was apparently attacked and he finds this ghost lady and makes out with her. He then returns to Wendy and says that nobody was there, and Wendy accepts this. Think about it. Before this, she finds nasty bruises on Danny's neck and instantly accuses Jack of doing it. Danny then tells her this story of some strange lady, and she's not there. So surely that must mean it was Jack. But she never once actually accuses him again for the rest of the movie.
I think he did it to himself.
What?
There is no other explanation, is there?
Well, you could have done it. This woman is a terrible mother. She leaves her son alone when there's apparently abusive women around. She lets her husband beat the crap out of him.
So Jack flips and yells at Wendy before storming off, making himself look even more guilty. Seriously, surely now should be the time that she takes Danny and leaves, but nope.
Everything's okay.
Now they do show at one point that the snow is too heavy and the car is pretty much useless now, but logically you'd sooner wrap your boy up as much as possible and walk through the snow and try to reach civilization rather than remaining in a hotel with a crazy psychopath with an axe. She even manages to bloody go to sleep. I'd never sleep again, let alone in the same building. And Danny then gets taken over by the spirits of the hotel wielding a knife at Wendy.
How come Wendy's never affected?
Oh no, Stanley Kubrick is foreshadowing It.
Which is a crap movie, by the way, and was never scary, and now everyone's like, oh, the new one looks so scary, it's gonna be scarier than the original. Well, the first one wasn't scary, so probably.
Jack has a scene where he meets a waiter called Grady, which we'll discuss more later, but it drags on for way too long. For a film littered with scenes that aren't developed upon as much as they could have been, it's just bizarre that this almost entirely pointless one lasts as long as it does. Would tiny ass Shelley Duvall really be able to drag big ass Jack Nicholson around like this?
Sorry, I'm gonna say no.
Yes.
And not only can she drag heavy ass Jack Nicholson around, but she can't open up a wedged window. Go figure. When Dick gets killed off, the only downfall is Jack's acting and his ludicrous hopping as he does it. It's odd because in the behind the scenes documentary, Kubrick would ridicule Jack for over the top fake acting, but somehow kept this in the film. He looks ridiculous.
I'm the killer. Take me seriously.
Awfully nice of you to say.
Also, during the final act, Danny is hiding in a cupboard. Jack calls his name, and he comes out, and then runs away.
I'm gonna hide from Dad. And then as soon as he says my name, I'm going to come out, just to run away. Wow, now that's what I call a limp dick.
But regardless of its problems, the film is genuinely creepy and chilling as hell. It delivers insane visuals, some of which aren't really explained very well, but do shake you to your very core. Seriously, what the hell is this? It's just random and weird.
FYI, it was actually explained in the book. Basically, the manager of the hotel had a secret homosexual affair with a guest who wore a dog costume. Doesn't explain why in this one he's wearing a bear costume. So I guess Stephen King didn't really explain it properly either, but that's the closest we've got.
I don't have any recollection of that at all.
But here's a shock. This film, I think, is too rushed. Yes, this film is over 2 hours long, and I think it was too short. This is a first for this show.
My point is, Dick reveals to Danny that he possesses the exact same psychic abilities after just one scene together. Just one. No development to know he can trust him, no bonding to get to know him, just gives him ice cream and then, yeah, I'm psychic.
Couldn't predict his own death though, could he? It's weird because in the book he could.
What do you mean?
And in addition to that, Jack's transformation is rushed, if not non-existent. I don't feel like we do actually go on this journey through a man's psyche or through a paranormal haunting. Jack acts like a cock at the 31-minute mark. This could have easily been a 3-hour film if the screenplay actually took the time to develop the characters a bit more. Stephen King was right.
That sounds weird saying out loud.
It is quite a story.
I dig films that leave things up to the viewer's interpretation, which this movie does. The film has so many bizarre images which a lot of the time are left unexplained and are left up to your own opinion, including the ending. We see a photograph of the hotel guests from 1921 and Jack seems to be there. Many believe this is a sign of reincarnation, which is added onto the fact that Mr. Ullman claims the caretaker Grady killed his family. Jack then confronts a Grady at the party who has a different surname and actually claims that Jack is the caretaker, implying that Grady too was reincarnated but kept his first name. It would explain Jack being drawn to this specific hotel, and in fact maybe even explain why he was a bit weird and psychotic at the very beginning. Others believe that Jack was simply absorbed into the Overlook Hotel itself. As the ghostly butler Grady tells him during the confrontation in the men's toilet, "You're the caretaker, sir. You've always been the caretaker." Perhaps in some earlier incarnation Jack really was around in 1921, and it's his present day self that is the shadow, the phantom photographic copy. But if this picture has been there all along, why has no one noticed it? After all, it's right at the centre of the central picture on the wall, and the Torrances have had a painfully drawn out winter of mind-numbing leisure in which to inspect every corner of the place. Is it just that the thing in plain sight is the last thing you see? When you do see it, the effect is so unsettling because you realise the unthinkable was there, under your nose, overlooked the whole time. Wow. And that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video and want to see more, I'm reviewing every film in the 1001 Movies You Must See Before You Die 2016 edition book, so make sure you subscribe to keep up to date with them and also turn on notifications to be alerted for each episode. You can vote for which film to be reviewed next at the link in the description. What do you think of The Shining? Let me know about it in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next video.
September at the minute is just getting no videos because I'm spending all of my time on this Venom month. Poor September.